The night sky over the Bandiagar escarpment is not gentle. It is sharp, crowded with stars, and so dark that the Milky Way looks less like a cloud and more like a wound torn across the heavens. Long before telescopes, long before photography, before Europe even suspected this cliffside world existed, elders of a small West African people told stories under that sky. Stories about a star you cannot see, orbiting a star everyone can. How did they know it was there? That question has echoed for nearly a century, growing louder every time it's repeated. Because the people asking it aren't just astronomers or anthropologists, they're skeptics, mystics, historians, conspiracy theorists, and anyone who has ever wondered whether human knowledge sometimes appears where it shouldn't. The people are often called the Dogon, sometimes mistakenly rendered as dogma in older translations or oral retellings. But they call themselves simply Dogon, meaning people of the plateau. And the mystery attached to them refuses to stay still. This is not a story about ancient aliens, at least not only that. It's a story about knowledge, transmission, misunderstanding, and the uncomfortable possibility that we don't fully understand how cultures remember, adapt, or absorb information. It's a story about facts that are solid, claims that are slippery, and a contradiction that sits right at the center like an unsolved equation. Because the Dogon say they have always known about a star called Po-Tolo, a dense, heavy companion to Sirius, the brightest star in Earth's sky. Modern astronomy confirmed Sirius B in the 19th century. So how did the Dogon describe it before that? That question will return again and again, and each time it will look slightly different. The Dogon homeland stretches across central Mali, clinging to sandstone cliffs that rise abruptly from the Sahel, like a wall built by the earth itself. Villages are stacked vertically along the escarpment, granaries embedded into rock faces, ladders leaning into emptiness. From a distance, the settlements seem hidden, almost secretive, an illusion that has fed the mystery. For centuries, the Dogon resisted outside influence. They migrated to this harsh terrain between the 13th and 15th centuries, largely to escape Islamic expansion and the slave trade. Geography became protection. Culture became armor. Their cosmology, their understanding of how the universe works, is intricate, symbolic, and deeply ritualized. It is taught through masks, dances, and oral instruction that unfolds over decades. Not everything is told to everyone. Some knowledge is reserved for initiates, some for elders. Some, according to Dogon belief, is dangerous if revealed too soon. That structure matters. Because much of what the world thinks it knows about Dogon astronomy comes from a handful of conversations recorded in the 1930s and 1940s. Enter Marcel Griol. Griol was a French anthropologist, trained, meticulous, and deeply convinced that Dogon cosmology contained extraordinary depth. Over more than a decade of fieldwork, he and his colleague Germain Dieterlen documented myths, symbols, diagrams drawn in the sand, and long oral explanations from Dogon priests, particularly one elder named Ogotemeli. According to Griol's records, the Dogon described Sirius as a system, not a single star. They spoke of Po-Tolo, a small, incredibly heavy star made of a dense metal, orbiting Sirius every 50 years. They said it was invisible to the naked eye. They said it exerted gravitational influence. They even described its elliptical orbit. These details are unsettlingly close to what modern astronomy says about Sirius B, a white dwarf star, extremely dense with an orbital period of about 50.1 years. And here's the first crack in the wall of certainty. Sirius B was first observed through a telescope in 1862, and its properties were gradually understood over decades of astrophysical research. White dwarfs themselves weren't fully theorized until the early 20th century. The Dogon explanations, Griol claimed, predated this knowledge or at least existed independently of Western science. If that's true, it suggests one of three possibilities. Either the Dogon preserved ancient astronomical knowledge lost elsewhere, or they acquired modern scientific information through contact, consciously or unconsciously integrating it into their cosmology. or the interpretations themselves are flawed, misunderstandings layered on misunderstandings. The trouble is, each possibility raises new problems. Let's slow down and examine what is solid. It is a verified fact that the Dogon have a rich cosmological system involving stars, planets, and cycles. It is a verified fact that Grial documented claims about Sirius and Potolo. It is also a fact that Sirius B exists and matches some of those descriptions. What is not verified is when the Dogon acquired this knowledge, how widespread it was within their society, and whether it truly existed before European contact. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this story. Critics began raising eyebrows almost as soon as Grial's work was published. Other anthropologists visited the Dogon region and failed to replicate his findings. When they asked Dogon informants about Sirius B, many had no idea what they were talking about. Some had heard fragments, some seemed to be repeating explanations that sounded suspiciously modern. This led to an uncomfortable question. Did Grial, intentionally or not, influence what he recorded? Anthropology in the early 20th century was not immune to bias. Researchers often asked leading questions. Translators filtered meaning. Sacred metaphors were sometimes interpreted literally. And when an anthropologist expects hidden knowledge, it has a way of appearing. But dismissing everything as contamination is also too easy. Because the Dogon cosmology contains other astronomical elements that are genuinely sophisticated. They tracked Venus. They understood the cycles of Jupiter's moons. Their calendar systems were complex and mathematically precise. Their rituals aligned with celestial events. This is where the mystery deepens instead of resolving. One recurring detail in Dogon myth is the concept of density, of heaviness. Po means small seed, but also origin. Tolo means star. The idea of something tiny yet massively heavy is symbolically central to Dogon creation stories. Critics argue this is metaphorical, not astrophysical. Supporters counter that metaphors don't accidentally align with white dwarf physics. And hovering over this debate is the temptation to leap to extraordinary explanations. Some believe ancient visitors, call them gods, teachers, or extraterrestrials, shared advanced knowledge with the Dogon. This interpretation often cites the Nomo, amphibious beings in Dogon myth who descended from the sky bringing order, speech, and science. But here, caution is essential. The Nomo are symbolic figures found in many African mythologies, often associated with water, fertility, and language. To reinterpret them as literal extraterrestrials requires a leap not supported by evidence. There is no archaeological trace, no independent corroboration, no technological residue. What remains is belief, not proof. Yet belief persists because the contradiction persists. If the Dogon did not independently discover Sirius B, then how did the idea enter their cosmology? One plausible explanation is cultural diffusion. By the late 19th century, missionaries, traders, and colonial administrators had passed through the region. Astronomical knowledge, simplified, fragmented, could have been shared. Over decades, it might have been absorbed into existing myth structures. But this explanation has its own weaknesses. The Dogon elders. Grial spoke with were not casual storytellers. They were initiated priests trained to preserve tradition with precision. Oral cultures are not sloppy by default. Many are astonishingly accurate over centuries. So we circle back to the same question, now sharper than before. How did the Dogon know what they knew, or believe what they believed, when they believed it? At this point in the story, it's worth pausing. Not because the tension has vanished, but because the mystery has grown dense enough to breathe in. If you're enjoying this investigation so far, we'd be grateful if you'd like the video. Share it with someone who loves mysteries like this, and subscribe to the channel. It helps keep explorations like this going.
Now let's step closer to the heart of the matter. One of the most overlooked aspects of this debate is how knowledge is framed. Western science values explicit measurement, written records, and reproducibility. Dogon knowledge is encoded in ritual, symbol, and layered secrecy. What looks like a factual claim to one system may function as a cosmological metaphor in another. For example, the Dogon also spoke of a third star in the Sirius system, Yatolo. Modern astronomy has searched for it and found no definitive evidence. Some take this as proof the Dogon were wrong. Others note that Sirius C has been hypothesized intermittently, though never confirmed. The problem is that selective accuracy can mislead. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We notice hits and forgive misses. And yet, dismissing the entire tradition because of one unconfirmed detail feels equally unsatisfying. The Dogon Mystery endures because it sits at the intersection of humility and hubris. Either ancient cultures were more observant than we assume, or modern interpreters are more suggestible than we admit. There is also the uncomfortable possibility that both are true. Another thread often ignored is timing. Grial's most detailed accounts were published after decades of engagement. By then, the Dogon had experienced intensified contact with outsiders. Oral traditions evolve. They respond to new contexts. What begins as metaphor can crystallize into apparent fact when retold through a new lens. This does not mean the Dogon invented knowledge. It means knowledge is alive. And this brings us back, again, to Sirius. Why Sirius? Why not some obscure star? Because Sirius matters. It is the brightest star in the sky. It has been mythologically significant across civilizations, Egyptian, Greek, Polynesian. It marks seasons. It rises and sets with ritual importance. If any star were to accumulate layered meaning, it would be this one. The Dogon focus on Sirius may not be evidence of impossible knowledge, but of shared human attention, refracted through culture. Still, the question remains unresolved. Because even the most cautious explanations do not fully erase the strangeness of those early descriptions. Density, orbit, invisibility, periodicity. These are not obvious guesses. As the years pass, the Dogon Mystery has become less about proving a theory and more about exposing our assumptions. About what counts as knowledge, about who gets credit for observation, about whether mystery must always be solved to be meaningful. Some mysteries refuse to stay contained within a single video, and if you're carrying a theory, a doubt, or a detail we haven't explored, the comments are where that story keeps unfolding. In the end, the Dogon do not offer us an answer so much as a mirror. They reflect our discomfort with uncertainty, our hunger for revelation, and our tendency to swing between dismissal and belief. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is not that the Dogon knew too much, but that we expect knowledge to look a certain way and grow uneasy when it doesn't. Under that sharp African sky, the stars remain where they've always been. Sirius still burns. Its companion still orbits, unseen but measurable. And somewhere between myth and measurement, the question still waits. Not how did they know, but why does it trouble us that they might have? And if that question keeps you looking up a little longer than usual, there's another mystery waiting in the next video.